Hi guys, I'm back and I want to show you the dried paintings from the past several videos, and then I will let you in on what we're going to do today. This is the Halloween painting, obviously, and it dried completely smooth, which is really, you can see how nice and smooth it is. You can kind of see the paint is a different, more matte right there, because I had to go back and paint that in because a bug, for some reason the gnats around here love the smell of this paint, so they're always climbing in it, but they wait until the paint is almost dry to climb in it. So they're stuck, and I tried to pick him out, and of course it just made it worse, of course. So if you get a bug in your painting, wait until your paint dries, and a lot of times you can kind of scratch him out of there without disturbing your paint pattern. Although I have had several bugs who have fallen into the paint and have walked at least an inch or two across the painting before getting completely stuck. So I usually have a trail going through some of my paintings. Yes, I know I need to cover them up. And I'm working on trying to figure out how to do that, because this is my kitchen table, so I can't exactly have a big cover over a bunch of paintings. For like, these actually took almost a week to dry. I didn't have my ceiling fan on, and my ceiling fan really helps to dry things out, but it also does help to cause cracks. So if you're painting, don't have your ceiling fan on when your paint is trying to dry, especially if your paint's a little thick on the canvas. As long as you have those pins underneath there, you know, so the airflow can get underneath, because a lot of times you pick up your painting, you think it's dry, but if you feel underneath, it feels kind of damp. So there is the Halloween painting, dried really nicely, so we'll have to just, you know, let it cure. I usually let these cure for several weeks before I put any kind of varnish over them. This is the second one. I'm not real excited about this painting, but I mean, it's kind of pretty, and Nora won't let me paint over it, so it's here to stay. I like this section here, and as you can see, you know, this one dried absolutely completely flat. I think we poured more of the paint off of it, so I wasn't really worried about this one. But it, you kind of see those cells right there. That's a pretty little spot. But yeah, I mean, this one dried good. It's a happy little painting. And this one right here, this was an interesting painting, to say the least. And it took, of course, it took a little longer than the other two to dry, but it did not dry with any cracks in it whatsoever. I think I've just been lazy in leaving the ceiling fan on to let it help dry my paintings out, because I like getting rid of the paintings off of the table relatively quickly instead of them sitting here for a week on the table drying. But it has gotten chilly outside as well as in the house. So, you know, turning the ceiling fan off was more, you know, preservation of life than preservation of paintings, but it seems to have helped, so I have to keep that in mind. Let me get you close. There's, I don't know if I can focus with it that close, but there's like all these teeny tiny, I call them little galaxies. They look like little galaxies to me. I hope you guys are in focus. I can't really tell, but you know, all these cells popped up on their own. I did not heat through this area. They just came up through that white, and that was because we poured over a lot of the color. The white kind of went over the color. That's a really kind of cool area, and some of it along these edges might look a little different than it did in the video, because I think some of the paint sunk through the white, maybe, I don't know. But still, I mean, this one is nice and dry, perfectly smooth, not one crack. Someone did suggest to me adding some of that GAC 800 to it to keep my paintings from cracking. And I wouldn't mind trying that, but the GAC 800 is expensive. And you guys know I tend to, you know, walk on the less expensive side of things. So I don't know if I can really, you know, justify. If my paintings, you know, from here on out, if I've got the ceiling fan off, dry like they should, then, you know, maybe I can get by without some of that GAC 800. But I really would like to try it, especially if I'm going to turn the ceiling fan on. Okay, so onward with what we're going to do today. What to do with your failed canvases. Now, I don't know if you can see from there. I'll probably have to pick it up. Okay, so let's see if I can show you. This, I love this painting. I really did. I was really sad that it cracked all over the place. And most likely because I had my ceiling fan on. This painting is from a long while back. I think this was some leftover paint from probably one or two different paintings, several different paintings. And it cracked, and I was really sad about it. And I kind of went through and I tried to touch up with a little bit of regular paint, but it didn't really. I was planning on, there's a good shot of the cracks, like all up in here. So what I was planning to do with this one was I was thinking about pouring some resin over it and hope that the resin filled in the cracks and then they weren't visible through the resin. Because resin can actually fix a few of your little problems if they're minor. But I really don't want to waste that much resin just in case it doesn't work, unfortunately. So one way you can rescue your paintings is to cut it off of the frame here. And I'm not going to do that one today because I'm still on the fence about this one because I just love this little painting. I might do another one with the same colors. I know I'm not going to get the same painting, obviously. I think this one was done, the silicone in this one is probably the CRC heavy duty silicone, which I don't use anymore. I use the treadmill belt lubricant, 100% silicone oil. You know, obviously I get way different results than I used to. Now, I'm not complaining about the results I used to get because I really love this painting. It's got lots of little cells. It's got some big chunky cells. I think it's, you know, the color is real balanced. It's got these lovely, I love these little veins. These are my all-time favorite. When those come up, it's rare and I get really excited about it. So anyway, what you can do is you can cut this off the frame. Now I have an empty frame that I just cut it along the edges there. Just took my pocket knife and ran it along the edges. If you want to save the frame, which I have done, you know, just it'll rip off of there with a little bit of force. So you just kind of yank it off of there, and then later on you can go back and pick out. You can actually pull out the staples if you don't mind the staple holes. And as you can see, you've got the joints here. Of course, if you take it off with a pocket knife, you leave this lovely dent in it. But the frame, you know, if you want to go buy some blank canvas and rewrap using the frame, that might save you a little money. I don't know. You know, I buy my canvases when I have a 50 or 60% off coupon. So I'm not sure I can buy canvas just on a roll for cheaper than that. But I think with some work with these frames, you know, if you get some of that that wood, it's not wood putty, it's not called wood putty anymore. It used to be years, you know, 20 years ago, but now it's called plastic wood. And fill it in there and then sand it down, and it's actually stronger than the wood that these frames are made out of. So if you want to reuse this frame, you know, you can paint it whatever color you want. Just get a nice lacquer spray paint the lacquer because it's shiny and it's more resistant to damage than, you know, just a regular spray paint. But yeah, so you can reuse these frames. I haven't actually reused one yet, but I am planning on reusing them because I'm not just going to throw those away. So you cut off the offending, messed up painting there. Or you can use, you know, a cool skin that you peeled off of your plastic. This was just kind of a neat piece. I haven't really decided what to do with it. I don't have any more of this, so I can't really do a project like this with it, but you know, that little piece right there, or maybe that piece right there might make a cool piece of jewelry. So that's what you can, you know, this was actually a swipe that I went through with the paint that was just sitting on the table, and it actually turned out pretty cool. But you have to be careful with these as well. After you pull them up, after a little while, they start getting very brittle. So if you're going to use a skin, you know, let it dry for a week or two, and then do something with it before it gets hard and brittle, because you might lose some cool pattern that way. So cut this off. Then you're going to go for the next step, which is to cut it into pieces. Just cut it in, and what I'm doing is, you know, the gravity rocks. I don't know if you guys, some of you probably know of it, some of you don't. I go hiking a lot, and up in North Georgia, you've got some really great hiking areas. And one of the areas we love to hike is a place called Ravens Cliff, and it's about a 5-mile hike. The girls love it. I love it. And it goes by a river in which people love to stack the stones. So usually we'll, like, you know, go along and add a stone to somebody's pile, and then somebody else will come along and add another stone, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I don't know, they're just neat, you know. I don't know, I find peace in the, you know, in the outdoors. That's where, more so than actually in the paint. So you've got your pieces cut out, so you need a background for it. Alright, so I just got a piece of wood board, and I painted it. And actually, first I put tape on the back because I'm going to pour resin over, and I don't want the resin to, you know, beat up on the back. I don't want to have to sand the resin off of it. So I went ahead and used just my cheap knockoff painter's tape, which works just fine. Now I will tell you that the cheap knockoff painter's tape doesn't work quite as well as the original painter's tape. So, you know, if you want an absolute perfect edge along here, buy the real stuff. But this works really well. So I painted it, and I actually put just a hint of glitter across it, as you can see. I painted it with the Artist Loft, what is this one? Metallic Cobalt Blue. Just sort of match. And so you can kind of see all the pretty glitter on there. I'm not a huge glitter fan, but every once in a while I think, you know, glitter is called for. I used a lime green glitter and a turquoise glitter. Now, I accidentally dumped a ton of glitter on this on accident. I was doing it sort of without my bright light on, and it was late last night. So, but luckily with this, for some reason with this Artist Loft Metallic Cobalt Blue, it dries nice and kind of hard. So I was able to just take my scissors and scrape a lot of the glitter off. So now it's just a light dusting of glitter. And then you're going to take your pieces, and you just want to arrange them in whatever pattern you like, and move them around. A really good way to decide if you like your pattern is actually take your phone or your camera and take a picture of it the way you have the pieces set out, and, you know, move them around. You can do them into several different patterns, and then stare at the photograph instead of at this, bring your photograph up on your phone or your camera or whatever and actually look at that, because I have found that it's much easier to determine if I, like a pattern if I'm looking at the photograph of it. And you can kind of, on your phone, you can kind of swipe back and forth between several different pictures to kind of see, what your favorite pattern is. So we have our pattern. Obviously I worked it out ahead of time several times. And now I'm going to take, just because it's one of the few glues I have in the house, I'm going to take my diamond glaze, and it actually glues, it actually dries really quickly. So I can glue this down. And now what I would advise you to do is come back the next day after this is really dried hard, and then we're going to pour resin over this. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to glue these down, and then we'll let those dry overnight, and I'll come back tomorrow and we will pour a lovely coating of resin over these pieces. So, for this glue, you don't want too much of it on there because you don't want it to squeeze out around your pieces. So I'm just going to, glue this down, and you can wipe it off, but it's diamond glaze, so it's real clear. So once you pour the resin over it, this is not going to, even if some of it has squeezed out, it's not going to show up. But you do want to get it as close to the edges as possible. So, squeeze a little bit along the edges, and then take anything, a piece of paper, a piece of cardstock or something, and run it to the edges of your piece. That way you'll have a nice seal around the edges, hopefully, and the resin won't flow underneath your pieces. And try not to get the stuff on your hands because it's kind of like super glue. But like I said, you just want to kind of bring it to the edges so that the edges will, adhere. And I'm not sure if this is going to work all that great for this particular board because this board has texture to it. And you don't have a lot of work time with this diamond glaze. So, put it down, get it on there, and quit fussing with it. And you don't want to smear your glue on top of your paint. And because this was an older painting, I didn't use the, for this painting I believe I used the CRC silicone, which a lot of times I don't tend to have trouble pouring resin over before I clean it. So I haven't cleaned this canvas off. Okay, so there's the one piece. Now I'm going to finish gluing the rest down off camera because it's a little boring to watch me glue all these pieces together. So I will glue these down and let it dry for overnight, and then we'll come back tomorrow and I will show you how I mix my resin, because several of you have actually asked me how I mix resin. So it's really a simple process, but I'll show you how to do it. Okay, we'll be back. Alright, so I have all the pieces glued down. The glue has dried, and it's all over my fingers because, like I said, it's like super glue. So if y'all are going to use this glue, you should be wearing gloves. But, I'm kind of lazy about that sometimes. But, yeah, so we're going to use the Stone Coat Countertops Art Coat resin again because it is just awesome resin. It really dries real clear, and it takes a long time to cure compared to the other resins, which is awesome because your work time is like 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes, maybe even as much as an hour, depending on what you're doing with it. And with a lot of the other resins, at least the less expensive resins, you have maybe 15 minutes at the most with some of the other resins that I have used. And sometimes that's a good thing because you just want to pour a clear coat and be done with it, and you want it to cure quickly because that cuts down on your chances of getting dust in it. But I really like the Stone Coat Countertops Art Coat resin because, one, the longer work time, so it's fun. You can play around with it a lot. And two, it dries really clear. It doesn't have that yellow tinge to it that some of the other resins have some of the time. So what I'm going to do is, this is a resin where you mix 1 part of the resin and 1 part of the hardener. You pour them in 2 separate little cups, mix them together, mix for 2 minutes, pour them in another little cup, and then mix again for 2 minutes, just to make sure that, you know, and use a separate stick the second time you're stirring, just to make sure that everything is completely mixed. So I'm just going to use these 2 little medicine cups. They work really, really well. Yeah, just pour the same amount in each little cup, and then we'll go from there. But I'm definitely not going to pour them over top of this. Like you know, a lot of times we'll set our paint down and our painting down there, and we'll, you know, set our little cups over there and be pouring over top of it, and sometimes disaster happens. So I'm gonna get some gloves on. What I like to do is usually I'll put like 3 layers of gloves on, depending on what I'm doing, because it's a lot easier to put 3 pairs of gloves on to begin with, as opposed to putting 1 pair of gloves on, and then having to take them off and put another pair of gloves on, just so you can torch your work. So if you put 3 layers on, and I don't know where I got these gloves from. I think they came from the hubby. He found them for me. They're way too big for my hands. So I don't think I have any more magician gloves, unfortunately, because I really liked those magician gloves. And for those of you who have not seen some of my previous videos where I was pouring resin, I refer to the magician gloves as magician gloves because they're just, you know, they're white vinyl gloves, but they're white. So when I put them on, I feel like a magician. And then, let me do this where y'all can see. The resin has a little plug in it, and to be honest, I really don't know why. So I continue to put it back in there, even though it's really hard to get out. But I put it in there because I don't want my resin leaking everywhere. If it gets knocked over by one of the dogs or one of the children, because that does tend to happen. And it doesn't matter how much I pour in there, just whatever I think I'm going to need. And it is super thick today because, whoa, it is quite cool in the kitchen. And we're just going to catch that because I don't want to go everywhere. That is why I put 3 pairs of gloves on, because you do stuff like that, you really don't want to put resin on everything else. So, you know, you want to be able to change your glove real quick before moving on. And your hands kind of get all sweaty under these gloves. So trying to put on another pair of gloves is really difficult sometimes. Alright, so we have got 1 part resin, and this should be plenty of resin to pour over this. Hopefully I'm just going to do 1 coat. Hopefully it won't, you know, the silicone won't cause any little divots, but you know, that's always possible. Here's where you want to be really exact, and hope I don't pour it on the table. There we go. You want to make sure you're pouring exactly the same amount. And that's actually a little too much. So, we're going to pour just a little bit back into the jug. And measure it again. And I think I've poured too much back in. I have. But you want to make sure, you know, that you're getting this completely even. Okay, we are exact. And another thing you really want to make sure that you are not pouring more resin than you need. Because this is what happens. You end up wasting that much resin. which is really heartbreaking. This has just been sitting on the table. My husband peeled the cup off of it. And so you can see how clear it dries, which is pretty cool. Of course, it's got a bunch of air bubbles in it because I didn't actually torch it while it was curing because I wasn't expecting it to cure in the cup. I was expecting it to cure on a piece of artwork. But we did not win out on that one. I think I don't even remember what piece of artwork that was from, but we worked on it for a long time. I do remember that. I mean, I was working on it, I think, for like an hour. And while we're doing this here, I want to say thank you to all of my subscribers, all of my viewers, everybody, all the new people that have joined us. I really appreciate having you guys here, watching, you know, the neat things that we're working on, the fun things we're experimenting with. And then you're going to pour the hardener in there. I believe you're supposed to pour the hardener into the resin, and I'm not really sure why it really makes a difference, but that's what the instructions say. So, and now we're just going to stir for 2 minutes. I'm going to put my hand around it, warm it up just a little bit, because that resin is really thick. In fact, we're going to take some heat to it just to kind of warm it up a little bit. Usually I take my bottles and I put them in the sink in some lukewarm water to kind of get them to room temperature. But the room temperature in here is super chilly. Thank goodness. Summer is finally over. But for some reason, you know, our weather, there's something pretty to look at. Our weather now, you know, it used to be during October, you know, Halloween at the end of October. Shh! Thor, be quiet. Usually at the end of October, you know, when we were kids, we went Halloween trick-or-treating, it was freezing outside. We'd have to bundle up. We'd be frozen, you know, our feet and hands would be frozen by the time we got back to the house. And it was like that every year. And even sometimes on Halloween, it actually, I think it snowed once or twice for us when we were kids. But nowadays, you have no idea if it's going to be freezing cold or burning up. And the past couple of years, my kids were really hot and they took off their jackets. So I don't know what it's going to be, but I'm just glad that, and you see there's a bunch of air bubbles whipping into this. I think partly it's because the resin is so thick, it doesn't want to, it's just picking pockets of air. But no problem with the air bubbles, they'll go away as soon as I take some heat to it. It's starting to warm up a little bit. I didn't put these in the sink because usually I don't, the resin that I used to work with is smaller bottles, so I can easily put those in a bucket in the sink so that, you know, the excess resin or hardener that's kind of flowing off of the bottles don't end up in the sink on my dishes. But these bottles are huge, so, and I've got the heater running in here. I thought it was going to be warm enough, but clearly it's not. Okay, I'm going to mix this for just a second, and I'm going to go let the dog out. I'll be right back. And who knows what he's barking at. Half the time he runs out the door barking, and then he goes into the middle of the yard and just stares around in circles. Like, well, where did he go? Well, it was probably never there to begin with. Alright, so we're going to take another cup, pour that into it, and re-stir one last time. Now this is definitely more resin than I think our little project here is going to take. And you know, you don't have to use resin to cover these. If you don't like resin, you don't want to work with it, you're scared of it. I know a lot of you really don't want to work with it because maybe you've worked with it once before and it was just a complete disastrous mess and you don't want to do it again. And I can understand that because that's exactly how I was when I used resin the first, I don't know how many times. Because it really can be a huge sticky mess. But you just have to learn how to use it correctly and, you know, how to use the correct amount, what your little tricks of the trade are to, you know, have a successful pour. So make sure you've got it all stirred up. You know, when it's clear and it doesn't look cloudy anymore, it's mixed thoroughly. And it would be clear if I didn't have so many air bubbles. But once I pour it out here, it'll be a much thinner layer. And, alright, so you guys have seen how I mix my resin. Measured in equal parts, pour the hardener into the resin, mix it up in one little container, pour it into another little container, and mix it up again just to make sure, you know, make sure you're scraping your sides all the time. Make sure you use a fresh stick when you go to mix it up the second time. And, you know, don't worry about the bubbles as you're mixing, especially with this stone coat stuff. The bubbles come out so easily. There are some resins where, you know, the bubbles don't come out quite so easily, and it gets frustrating because it ruins your work. But like I was saying, you don't have to pour resin over this. You could, if you don't, you know, if you're afraid of resin, you could just get a nice varnish and either spray it over, or I tend to use the polyacrylic over my paintings. So, and it works really well. Okay.